Al, I did respond back to your offer, so I do appreciate that. So I don't know whether they had a chance to read it. No?
I did, thank you, and I appreciate you giving me some of the background on the work that you were doing.
Yeah.
Cortez, you're good to go.
Okay, I'm also trying to find my my agenda, but I will get to that in a second. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July 7th, 2020 Heritage Richmond Hill meeting. Tonight's meeting is an electronic meeting being held during an emergency pursuant to Section 238, 3.3 of the Municipal Act 2001. Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, city facilities will not be open to the public to attend meetings until further notice. We have received one regret from committee member James Counter for tonight's meeting. The public had the opportunity to submit written correspondence regarding agenda matters by email to the clerk's office. All written correspondence received by noon today would have been included on the agenda, but there was none received. The public also had the opportunity to apply to appear as an electronic delegation, either by video conference or by telephone by noon today, and there was also none received. So thank you very much to the clerk's office for that blurb, obviously reading off script. You can tell me later if I can make a good news anchor or not. I will go to the agenda if I can pull that. I apologize for not having it ready. Somehow I lost it as I was trying to log in here. There it is. To the clerks, do we have quorum?
Good evening.
Through your chair, yes, we do. You have quorum.
Thank you, Ryan. Item number 1 is the adoption of the agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda tonight? Councillor Silavets, thank you very much. All those in favor? All those in favor of the adoption of the agenda, any opposed? Seeing none, it is approved. Thank you. Are there any pecuniary interests in general nature thereof tonight? Seeing none. Can I have a motion to receive the minutes of previous meeting and approve minutes of previous meeting? If one of the members of the committee would move the motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Dan Kelly, thank you very much. Any discussion on the minutes of our previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of our minutes of our previous meeting? Any opposed? I see none opposed. That is approved. Thank you. There are no delegations tonight, as mentioned earlier. Moving on to our scheduled business, item number 5.1, Heritage Grant Application, which is typically one of our happy items. Happy to read 26 Gormley Court recommendation that a heritage grant of $3,517 to a potential maximum of $5,000 be approved towards the cost of replacing windows in the Ontario Heritage Act Part 5 designated structure located at 26 Gormley Court, as outlined in staff report. Can I have a motion for the approval of the heritage grant application? Thank you, Doris. Discussion, any questions for staff or discussion? I see Marge, please go ahead.
My question, is there a reason that this was not with the other ones that we had accepted like last month, I believe? Or 2 months, yeah.
That is to staff. Can staff please provide comment on that?
Is Joanne available?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Oh, hi, Isa. You're here. I didn't know that you
I'm
were
here.
here to
Do you want
join
me
us.
to answer? Do you want me to
Oh,
answer?
Oh, well, it's great. Anyway, sorry, I have struggled getting in. I missed what you're saying because I was struggling to come in and out. So did everyone say thank you to you yet?
No, I haven't made an announcement or anything, but let's answer the question.
I'm
So
sorry,
I'll
I
go
didn't hear
ahead
the
and
question.
answer. I'll answer the question because I wrote the report. Yes, we indicated in the previous report that we were giving a few people additional time because of COVID-19. There were a couple of people who requested extra time because they had difficulties getting people in to give them estimates.
Okay.
So that was in the previous report. If you check it, you will see that there was an indication we would be possibly bringing forward some more applications.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that, so that's why I asked the question. So I did not know that was there. So thank you. Sorry about my oversight.
Nope, that's just fine.
Thank you, Margin. Thank you, Isa. Very curious now to hear what Isa was going to say, but I'm going to take Doris first, and then we'll go back to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Point of clarification, in reading the material, I understand that for these grants, applicants get up to $5,000, but the fund currently does not have $5,000 in it, if I remember correctly, left because of already the funding that we've provided to others. So we will fund them to the maximum that we can. And in the report, it stated, if for some reason one of the projects that's already been funded does not follow through, then we can increase the amount of the funding for this one particular application to the maximum of 5,000. Is that correct? Is my understanding of the process correct, Joanne?
Yeah, that's correct. Very frequently, there's applicants who do not follow through with the process. And so there's money remaining in the budget at the end of the year. But that's something that we would determine by the end of the year because the application for the funding has to be made by December 31st.
And getting the additional funding, does that require a new application process, or do you just notify the applicant that the total amount of the grant increases?
Yes.
I think that for the virtual, through you, the chair, sorry to interrupt, that it is now referenced in this particular report. That means that there is a potential, and I think that there is understanding, and it will be on record in this report. Ultimately, the way the grant work is that we don't provide the applicant the money right now. We only provide them once they have completed the work and it is to our satisfactory. So there could be a time when the work did not merit the amount that we said we would grant. And so there would be amount remaining that we could actually utilize to provide it to, say, this applicant if they merit that amount.
Thank you very much for the clarification.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions on item 5.1? Al, please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, just looking at the report on page 5, I just wondered if there's a typo, and I just want to clarify that. I'm looking at page 5 of the report under financial, staffing, and other implications. Second line, it's the second sentence, and it reads, there are sufficient funds in the Heritage Grant account to cover the costs associated with the currently requested grant application. And it goes on to say, should one of the previously approved heritage restoration projects fail to be completed, there would be sufficient funds available to allow the city to provide them $5,000 maximum grant to this project. I'm just wondering if that first sentence of the two that I read, being the second sentence of that paragraph, should read, there are insufficient funds.
Sorry, can I go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, make sure that the report was accurate and there was no typo. Because
I would say that there is minimum funding available. I believe the amount was $3,600, which is available. And should all of the projects be completed, the applicant will receive $3,600. If one of the applicants does not follow through with their proposal, then there will be additional funds that would enable this project to be bumped up to $5,000. So there is money available, but it depends on whether or not all of the projects get built. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to staff. I just want to clarify that. I wasn't quite clear.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Isa. Any other questions or thoughts on this item? Very good. All those in favor of item 5.1? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, it is carried. Thank you. Item 5.2, Designation Subcommittee Verbal Update. Can I have a motion for that item before we go into the discussion? Dan, I see your hand up. Thank you. There is a presentation associated with this, so I'll ask you, Dan, to please go ahead with the presentation, and then we'll open for any conversation or discussion.
Just one clarification on the previous motion at the discussion material distributed regarding the changes being received. Would that also include the support documents that I had provided with that as well?
Sorry, Dan, I think your microphone had some static there. It may be me on my end, but can you please maybe make a...
Sure.
Say that again.
The motion to receive
I
the
think, yeah,
material.
Dan, is it possible to maybe not do the video? It might help.
To not do the video.
Yeah.
Oh, so is it breaking up? Is that the problem?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, why don't I try the headphones? Because I was trying to avoid that.
It's more like static. I think it may be your microphone, Dan.
Oh, okay. Just bear with me here.
No problem.
Is that any better? Can you?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured that might be better. I've been criticized that when I wear these headphones, I talk too loud and disturb everybody else in the house. So.
We're good now.
Yeah. Sorry. So quickly, I was just questioning with that motion before. I just wanted to ensure that the material includes the discussion paper as well as the support material that I provided. There were two separate documents, one a research paper and the other one, I believe it was the Archaeological Conservancy of Ontario's analysis.
Through you, Chair, I'm going to put the motion up on the screen with a change, and as you're the mover of the motion, if it's acceptable to you, then hopefully that will work. Bear with me 1 second. So I've included what has been bolded there.
Yeah.
Perhaps that is acceptable.
Perfect. Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Dan, before you proceed, I wanted to recognize that we have Councillor Munch joining our meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. I just wanted to recognize Councillor Munch on the call. Thank you, Councillor, for joining us.
Great.
You're welcome. I'll stay unmuted.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. The second part is a presentation that we put together to try to help clarify and give an idea as to a framework and some ideas that we're trying to put forward. But first, I wanted to sort of address, I had a couple questions sort of asking the designated subcommittee, I mean, what is their mandate? Because, you know, the term designation sort of implies that it's really single focus, but in actual fact, I think our mandate is more on designation matters, which is additions, deletions from the registry, or matters related to the designated process. The intent is that the subcommittee enriches discussions at the HRH, and the HRH is looking to see that the subcommittee's opinion is on certain matters for voting. So I think of us more of a thought leadership, sort of taking some ideas, presenting them to the group. In some cases, there will be recommendations that could be just internal to the HRH, but they could continue on to council as well after discussions and recommendations and analysis. But they can be also educational to the group, because it would open up thoughts of areas that are trending right now. And you'll see from this presentation that we've tried to take things that are relevant to what's happening right now with legislation as a guideline to the topics that we would introduce and talk about in the future. So I hope that helps a little bit with what the subcommittee is trying to accomplish. And I think that the focus that we've had recently has been more to changes in the legislation and what effects they may have, or a little bit of education about what those changes are. That sort of gives us a basic work plan for the subcommittee to raise some ideas. And I think it was also, it would be helpful in the presentation, I think you'll see, to take another example of a discussion or background paper like we presented at the past meeting on demolition by neglect, to sort of educate, get the background, and then move forward with a direction as to how we would move forward on that and any recommendations that we would have. So with that, if there's any questions on that part of it, I just wanted to sort of set the context of what this presentation is really about. Okay. So as you can see, the key is really, it's key aspects of More Homes, More Choice Act that has been put into legislation. But I think as a first step, we should probably just review some fundamental principles that we have. Sorry, Ryan. Yeah, next slide. That fundamental principles that and questions that we typically would ask ourselves in the HRH meeting. Next slide. So the first one is just a review what the mandate is. And you can see from this, it's basically to act as advisory committee to council, advise on matters relating to Part 4 and the designation of individual properties, and Part 5, the designation of heritage conservative conservation district. In addition, it includes acting as a resource for citizens on matters pertaining to conservation, restoration, renovation of heritage properties. And it's also to work to raise awareness of the town or the city's heritage in the community. Next slide. So I think that this is actually taken from the government's resource material. And you can see that this includes responsibilities such as identifying properties, community, and developing partnerships with community and other people, education, informing other people. I would include that as education of ourselves. Ensuring financial accountability as we've just gone through the grant process, and other legislation affecting cultural heritage properties, which sort of is relevant to the rest of this presentation I'm going to go through. So I'll probably focus a little bit more on that last point. One of the key things that I thought that was important that came out of some of the government resource material was, in quote, was in establishing a heritage committee, the council recognizes the importance of a proactive approach to heritage conservation. And that's sort of what we're trying to accomplish here is we have operational responsibilities, which is to review applications that sort of come through. But I think we also have responsibility to try to think ahead of the curve and try to make recommendations that that are relevant to what's happening in our community. Next slide. So there are some fundamental questions and principles that when we discuss things, when we make recommendations, we should all have in our mind. And let's go to the next slide, and you can see that I think there are three fundamental questions. And please jump in here if you think there are, other elements that we should. But I thought these were the three basic questions that we should ask. Is, I mean, should a property be in the heritage register? How should that property be treated? Should it be listed? Should it be designated? And what should its conservation strategy be? Is it something that we want to preserve? It's something that we want to rehabilitate, which is, I think, an important topic to discuss. Is it something that we're restoring? Or is it some other element or strategy, such as monitoring, maintenance, stabilization, mothballing? These are all elements of keeping the heritage in a state of where people can appreciate what's there, as opposed to a vacant property that's in sort of decay. Next slide, Ryan, please. You saw this before in the paper that we produced, the discussion paper. I'm putting it again because I think it is relevant. These are very fundamental principles, I think, and as part of the new legislation, it is something that the government's focused on as well, that they felt that maybe they were a little bit more wanting. They need to give further direction or guidelines as to what these principles are for the municipalities and the cities to sort of look at. Some of them are fairly basic and probably don't need a lot of discussion, but it's always good to review these sort of things. So you can see that of the five, these are the first three: accountability and transparency, which are pretty straightforward. Identification and evaluation, which is what we tend to focus on mostly. Continuing care, that's an important principle that I think we need to keep abreast of and be involved in. Next slide. And impact assessment, and that is a part of our process and part of the expert advice that we get when we're making these decisions as well. And finally, just the general principle of using these heritage properties productively and reusing them or repurposing them in such a way, as opposed to a complete destruction and redevelopment of the whole area. I think it's a principle that we all try to accomplish. There are many parameters that we need to look at when we talk about the community, but I think it's important to keep this foremost in our mind as well. So next slide. Are there any questions on those principles? It is something that maybe in the future we could discuss these a little bit more detail, put a motion together that our committee is committed to these principles, and if it's something we want to take forward to council for them to consider, I think we could do that as well. But I think in addition to our mandate, this would help enhance that mandate a little bit, give us some principles that we could work on for the current group as well as future groups. Any questions or comments on that thus far? Okay, next slide. So if we now look at the act that was recently passed and is now in effect, and I think it's in effect in different stages as we move forward. There are a number of key areas that I think we could discuss further, and this is the whole genesis of our work plan from a subcommittee point of view. And I can go through each one of these items. And I think you'll begin to see the relevance, not only in the sample that I'm going to talk about today, but also what we presented as a discussion paper before for the committee. So if we go to the next slide, Ryan. Thank you. So as I mentioned already with the 5 principles, one of the key elements in the legislation was, further provincial direction in the area of principles of conservation, that sort of thing. They haven't come out definitively with anything. It's not something that I would expect to see shortly, but the principles that I gave to you or presented in previous slides actually come from the province of Ontario's own principles and policies that it follows for its protection of their assets that are heritage assets owned by the province. So I thought it was appropriate that we at least look at that as something that we could use for our own local sources. The second item is listing on the register, and this is an important part, and it's the sample that I've chosen today to talk further about, just to give you a sense of the next steps or some thought-provoking ideas on a particular area. So the listing on the register is one of them. The key to this is that in accordance with one of the principles of transparency, one of the changes to the act is, in fact, to allow the owner to appeal a listing, whereas before that wasn't the case. And it was for a very good reason, because it was a new process that we were trying to establish a inventory of heritage properties that go forward. And now I believe that the province is thinking we're getting to a mature point that we should have more transparency and more dialogue that goes on with regards to that area. The third point is actually some designation bylaws that they've made some minor changes to. The fourth item is timelines. They've changed various timelines. Some of these things, may not require a lot of discussion with our group, but I thought it was important to lay out as an immediate sort of area for us to have at least some sort of discussion. They streamlined the appeals process, and that's actually relates to item 7, which is demolition. So you can see that demolition is a topic in the new legislation that they do have a focus on. So I thought that the discussion paper was appropriate for that. So that's an example of how we see moving forward on some of these thoughts and ideas. 6 is completion of applications. In other words, some of the information that's required when you go through an application, they may have enhanced, or and we may very well be ahead of the curve on that as well. It's not something I've looked at in detail. And then the last item is ministry guidance for cultural heritage landscapes. So although our focus has always been on built heritage, there is important an important element of landscapes that in the context of built heritage as well, that's appropriate. It may not be applicable to the city itself, but we do have an example where that was taken into account when we talked about the Dunlop Observatory as well. So we have something unique within our city in this particular area, and we may be a bit of ahead of the curve on that. Any questions on this slide? Okay, next slide, Ryan. So today, like I say, I wanted to sort of give you an example, but I wanted to tie that example back to some of the other points that I brought up. So for example, accountability and transparency, as I pointed out, is a principle that can translate into one of the elements of the act that's changed. The second principle is identification and evaluation. In terms of the registry for the for heritage property. So the Richmond Hill needs to provide notice to the property owner within 30 days of their property that's been listed on the register. This provides them the right of objection to the municipality by the property owner, and it provides improved guidance to municipalities on listing best practice for the implementation. So this has a direct impact to us and how we actually view and our strategy going forward. So I thought it was important for us to take a close look at that, see if there's any improvements that we can make. It does open up, if we do put a listing on there, it opens up us, the city, to defend that if it goes to an arbitration, very much like, when you talk about the planning process and you have to defend the plan. We would have to do the same thing. So if we felt strongly, the city felt strongly enough, and the Heritage Committee felt strongly enough about something, we would have to have a process in place that would make a defensible argument to that. Uh, so, we need to be a little bit more disciplined in how we approach that, and so that was the genesis of the thoughts on the next bunch of slides that we're going to go through. So, Ryan, you could go to the next slide. So, a little bit more on the listings. In the past, we used the listing as a strategy to protect heritage sites or properties that were considered to have significant heritage features. So it was basically used to try to give a bit of time space, that if a property was going to be demolished, that there be a process that at least it could be discussed ahead of time, even though it hadn't been designated as a property. So I think there was a 60-day sort of period on that. So the strategy that was used in the past is that although we did inherit a large portion of the register, well, all of the register, I think Joanne gave us a bit of history at the last session on that. And we purposely accepted the list as it was because it was a good inventory of all the historical heritage features that we felt at the time. To if we were short on some items on that, we could use the listing process to try and protect that and give us some more time on analyzing that. But that's now, I think, needs to be rethought because of the fact that now the system is more transparent. The owner now gets involved and can appeal, and therefore we would have to go through a process that requires formal presentation and defense of a particular property that should be on the list and eventually become designated. So that's sort of where we wanted to focus. Ryan, if you could go to the next slide. So this is again a repeat of what the current legislation is that we have to sort of abide by. And if we go to the next slide, we're talking about, within the subcommittee right now, we're talking in more detail about what a proposed new process would be that would involve new forms and steps. So this would be something that would be specific to the Heritage Committee, that we would use as a foundation for our recommendations to council, so that it would be a more disciplined process, that over time the register would become higher and higher quality of heritage properties that we could evaluate. And to do that, we talk about a screening process. We talk about a funnel concept. And actually, if we go to the next slide, Brian, I think we show a little bit more about what the concept is going to be. Think of it as a funnel where you start off with just everybody nominating any sort of property that they see as being heritage. And again, things can be very subjective in this particular area, but there are some guidelines as to what should be looked at, what the criteria should be. At this stage, I'm just presenting a concept of the funneling approach. So the funneling approach would take, you know, elements of the screening process, and a screening process can be something simple, which is just a checklist that you sort of go through, or it could be something a little bit more um, detailed. And in our particular case, we have a draft of a form that we believe would apply a point system in a number of key areas. The idea then would be if it's greater than a certain number of points, and then we would take it to the next stage, which would be basically have staff review it, um, maybe bring in an expert to do a report on it to justify what we're saying. And this would all be done before it would get to the HRH, and then from the HRH to recommend to council. So that council would be uh, convinced that there is a disciplined approach to this, and that they would be getting good advice based on science and expert opinion, that sort of thing. It's not the other element in this is I talk about heritage stakeholders. So I'm opening it up that the screening process can involve not just say the subcommittee, that could be one of the first steps that we go through, but it could also involve, the the Heritage Society that we have. It could be maybe there's an architectural society in the particular region or area. Um, and how that might effectively be done is the form is shared, and we take a consensus of all the evaluations to get us to the point, and then move from there. So you sort of get the sense of, in this case, the principle that we're trying to abide by to come through this. So at this stage, I just simply wanted to give you a sense of the principle or the strategy that we're looking at to improve the process that we have. We have actually drafts of the form. We have a draft of the business process as a whole, who all the key stakeholders are, how they would fit in and at what stages. Um, we're just not ready to present this yet as a recommendation to the HRH. It's something we hope to do in the next coming months, um, and there would be further discussion and evaluation on that. But at this particular stage, I wanted to sort of keep it at a very high level just to give you an idea of the principle. So if we can go to the last slide, I wanted to try and emphasize why this is important that we do this. It is a protection of the city, in that just with any process that requires arbitration, um, you need to put a logical argument together as to why you're doing this. So in a sense, we could be exposed to, using additional resources and finances and all that sort of stuff if we don't have a disciplined approach. And in this particular case, what we're trying to do is be proactive and try to set up something that's a little bit more disciplined. So although there isn't a specific recommendation here, I wanted to try to bring you up to speed that I verbally have been telling you that we've been moving in this direction with some key points, but I thought it would be appropriate, and because there was some confusion on the paper that we produced before, um, I see this as a good opportunity to follow this approach more in the future to give you some sort of background. Maybe we can look at it as an education to all of us because we're all at different levels of skill and understanding of what heritage is and how we should approach it and what our vision is with the city. If we can come to a consensus within the HRH, then we can give even better recommendations, I think, to council when we come up with these ideas. And that's basically it. I hope that helps to some extent. I think there can be much more discussion. I think a point was brought up that if I go through that list in the legislation, one could answer, well, how do you decide on the priorities between one item versus another item? And I think it's subjective to some extent, but I think what we're trying to do at this particular stage is try to be practical and go to the things that are immediate effect to us. So that's why I chose the listing. Demolition by neglect is a topic that we should talk more about as well. And it happened to pop up because of the last couple of sessions that we've had and what's happened over the last, well, in my tenure in the last couple of years. I thought it would be appropriate to at least address that. But I think it's important that we try to pick some, in this case, the legislation as a go forward point. There is an argument to be made, and we've had this discussion within the subcommittee, is to talk about a conservation strategy, developing a conservation strategy, which would be, you know, and Doris would appreciate this because she's the one that raised it. It's a very good point, and it requires, I think, developing a vision. I think it relates back to me presenting you some of the principles because I think those principles are important to utilize in the whole process of developing that strategy. So with that, I wanted to get some thoughts on what was presented. If there's questions to clarify, I didn't want to take in too much detail at this stage, but to at least give you a flavor for what we're trying to accomplish is to, you know, take some trending ideas in heritage right now, which happens to be the changes to the legislation, and how that's sort of working into what we're trying to accomplish over the next months and years, I guess, through our mandate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. As always, very thorough, and your efforts are very much appreciated. And thanks to Al and Doris as well on the team at the subcommittee level. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Solovets, please go ahead. Your microphone's muted, Councillor.
Okay, sorry, it wasn't working. Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Dan, and your committee. I have to interject this because I'm concerned that I understand what Dan wants us to do here or is projecting, but I'm also concerned that we are overstepping our bounds and that we are overstepping the terms of reference of this committee. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Joanne. I understand that we do need some discussion about the new legislation, but we also have our staff members who produce the reports that come to Heritage Richmond Hill as they do to any committee or council. So what is the balance here? I'm sorry, but I'm not quite sure where this is supposed to go, because we have staff who does this, staff who are professionals, and I'm not so sure that what Dan is proposing here, with all respect to Dan and his committee, I'm not so sure that what you are proposing is in our bounds. It's up to the professionals, the heritage planners like Joanne, who need to bring us this information. So those are just my thoughts. I would like to hear what staff has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Joanne. Please go ahead and turn your mic on. Don't forget.
Yeah. Through the chairs, you know what? I think it's a really interesting presentation, and I'm actually beginning to see, if I read it correctly, what Dan's team is hoping to start to achieve. Initially, when the Designation Subcommittee was established, or I inherited it when I came into the city, there had already been a Designation Subcommittee. And at that time, the members had a great deal of knowledge of what they would like to protect in the city. And they already know what they want to put into the list. So their mandate was very simple in that we as staff ask that they provide us with a number of addresses that they would like to look into. And we found a operation budgets that can help us with developing research to find out more about those properties. And then we would be able to designate them when we need to. So that seemed to be a very straightforward relationship until such time when all the members from the previous sets of committee has left, and we now have new members who have a who are, you know, in various degree of knowledge within the history of the town and various cultural background. It's no longer as sure-handed, I think, in terms of recommending what should be added to the list. And I think that Dan, you can step in, because I'm trying to lay out perhaps what I understand it as a context of this presentation. And I think that it created a difficulty for the members of the subcommittee of this HRH committee, because they say, well, how do we know which one to pick? And I think that is a very reasonable thing to ask. And I think that we were not also confronted with this kind of question either, because previously we received a list of addresses that people who with a lot of knowledge about the Richmond Hills history already knew within their mind. But also what happened is that we also have inherited a lot of houses that might or might not have true intrinsic cultural heritage value, because it was put into the list in a rather simple, direct kind of way, and which is fine, because, you know, legislation processes develop and become more sophisticated. So that is where we are today. And I think that the designating subcommittee still would be very, very helpful, because I think that if the committee accepts the approach that Dan and his fellow members of the subcommittee proposes, in that to identify listing of a property, staff will still receive those listing of the properties. And we, you know, if it goes into designation, we still have to do the staff report. We still need to do the research, but it allows for a new sets of member like yourself with a very diverse background to actually establish a genuinely detached kind of structure to look at what could be included. Because I'm looking at things that we probably have never looked at, you know, let us say, you know, a religious building that was not inherently in Richmond Hills history, but because of the last 50 years, new social contexts occur, and this now is worthy of adding them to a list because it has meaning. So I think that is what I'm understanding this the proposed direction that Dan is going for, and it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, removed our work. It's just that I would say that it allows the committee to find a new way to look at buildings and build structure so that we as staff can actually get on with the job that we are always doing, which is to complete the research and to, whatever, and to prepare staff report to HRH as well as to council. So
Okay.
Dan, would that be something that, am I missing anything? Because this is what, after speaking with you and knowing you for the last 2 years, and in fact, the point system that you have developed, I've already shown you our previous attempt in the last 10 years in trying to find some systematic way of identifying what should be included in the list. Again, so this difficulty of knowing what to include in the list was never really resolved, because we relied on the previous committee member on their local history and their commitment to their own history. But when that context changes, we actually don't have an alternative and get this maybe a more dispassionate structure to do that. Dan, let me know if I am reading this correctly or not.
No.
Sorry, if I can please ask Councillor Silovets, is there a follow-up to that for Joanne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Joanne. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable. I'm looking at this from the outside in, right? So I want to make absolutely sure that all the steps that are taken that and are consistent with the legislation and the terms of reference of this committee. Secondly, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, just one more question to Joanne. Does the Ontario Heritage Act supply us with a guideline, even just a bare minimum of what are the specifics that permit a committee to name a built asset as being of heritage value?
Well, there are 2 levels. One is that the designation, and it was very clear, it's 906.
Yes.
906 regulation, because you have to meet at least one of the cultural heritage values.
Right.
That's for designation, and we would already have established our entire professional expertise to do that. In terms of research, we have established a whole process for it in terms of designation as well as defense in the appeal. But in terms of listing, that is to say, to actually provide an address of a building, so that in case it needs to be revealed, we have 60 days before it gets demolished. The listing itself, according to the Act today, is just, all you have to do is to be able to identify it. That means, just so that you have an address, and that's all you require, because the idea is not to actually research it to a point where you're almost ready to designate, because then why don't we just do that? So that at this stage, that is the level of requirement. One is actually just go on, to designate, which is a very detailed research. Another is just to have a identifiable address.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps make things a lot clearer for me, and makes me feel more comfortable. Dan, again, thank you. You've done a lot of work on this, and I think as we move through it, and we hopefully come to some document at the end of this that really is an excellent piece that guides us, and a real guidance piece for the committee. I think that is to me, that's ultimately what we are looking for here. So this sort of fills a vacuum that we haven't had before, and I think I think we're on the right track for sure, but it's certainly going to require a lot more discussion at the committee level. So thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I saw Marge's hand up first. Please go ahead, Marge, and then I'll take Al. Your microphone's muted, Marge.
Yes.
Your microphone.
She's having the same problems that I did.
I just know my fault. Wasn't paying attention. 3 things. First, just a point of clarification, Joanne, and I should have asked you this years ago. Who can add things to this list? Can I do it? Could Joe down the street do it? Do you need to be a staff? who can add to the list? And is there like just a form you fill out? Can you explain that?
Generally, it has been the Heritage Committee who provide the name, and every year they would add, or because that really, that's what I've been relying on. And the list, it would not be official until we actually go through council, because the list is actually be part of the inventory. So yeah. So generally, we previously, not this group, previously in my first two terms here, we would have it unminuted, and then the minute will be including those addresses, and then those will be added because it will be approved by council as part of the council extract. So yeah, council has to approve it. Until council approve it, it's just an address. And so in order for it to go to council, usually it's through the committee as a minuted discussion as a recommendation.
Okay, so for an example, say I wanted to nominate the Ganesh temple up on Bayview. So, or somebody asked me to do it. I would just put it forth, we'd have a discussion, and then that request, for example, would go to council. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you want to have a discussion, because again, because there's no criteria for adding to the list. In fact, the first 6-7 years and I was working here, I never really questioned it, because the committee provided strong conviction as to which ones they want to be listed, and they are fully aware of the fact that there is actually don't need anything else to justify it, as long as we have a recognizable address.
Okay. Okay, so can I ask my other two quick points? And they are very unrelated. Isa, I'm wondering what's the announcement from Isa is one. Two, Tom Munch has joined us, and I thought I'm surprised at that. Isn't like he certainly could listen in, but I didn't think we could have other people or counselors part of this actual meeting. So through you, Chair, can you explain that?
This is a public meeting. It's a public meeting.
But a public meeting, like if I had my husband, he couldn't come on. So I'm surprised Tom is here. So just if that is
no, I think that anyone can come. Anyone can.
Joanne, if I may ask that the clerks respond to that question, Joanne,
Of course.
thank you very much. And thank you, Marge, for your question. Ryan, can you please respond to Marge's question?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So for every committee meeting that is being held electronically, we are inviting all members of council as panelists to the meeting. For members of the public who would not be a member of council, they are able to watch it on the live stream. So the difference between the two is that should a member of council want to speak, they would be able to because they would be in the meeting, whereas someone in the public would only be able to watch the proceedings of the meeting.
Okay, I didn't realize that, so thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And sorry, Joanne, for cutting you off. I wanted to make sure the clerks have an opportunity to.
No, you're correct. You're correct. Yeah, but I just want to add that Heritage Richmond is a public meeting. Anyone can come, even when we have a physical meeting, anyone can come. It's just that they need to register in order to speak.
Yes.
Thank you, Joanne. I will take, I've made note of your question about ISA, Marge, and I'm as curious as you are, but I will ask Al to go ahead with the question he had on this item. Al, I saw your hand up. Did you want to speak to item 5.2?
Oh, yes, Mr. Chair. I just want to step up a level. Des did a great job of doing the presentation and getting right into the details. I just wanted to back up, though, as I say, and just go up one level. We've had many discussions at the subcommittee level, and perhaps this will provide a little bit more clarity if I just, as I say, go up one level to give you some more context about our analysis. To reassure everybody, first of all, at the subcommittee level, we go through the mandate of the committee and the subcommittee. We've gone through it and many times to ensure that we're acting within our scope and that we're not going beyond the terms of reference for the committee or the subcommittee. And we've worked with staff all along to ensure that nothing we do would be at cross purposes to their exemplary work. Now, just to give you an idea, the way we've looked at this is that we all are interested in protecting heritage. And the only way that we really protect heritage is by putting something on the list and ultimately, if required, put it on the registry. And temporarily, there are three parts to that. There's the time that a property is not on the registry. So before it's on the registry, there's a time that it's on the registry, and there's a time that it's after the registry. Now, at the committee level, we've already dealt with the third part, where we've looked at properties that were put on the registry by mistake, or sorry, put on the list by mistake, and we've had efforts to clean that up. So at the subcommittee level, we haven't focused on that third part too much. Where we have concerns is in the first and second part. With the first part, we've noticed, as we've had discussions at the committee level, and staff have indicated this at our very first meeting, and that there's a bit of a lack of a principled approach to putting things on the list. In the past, properties have just been put on the list because a group that might be sitting in the committee at the time has an interest in certain properties, which is fine, but that doesn't necessarily represent the interests of the diverse group that we have in the community at this time, and that we'll continue to have in the future. So we were looking for a more principled way to put things on the list to assist staff in looking at certain properties. As Dan was saying, we're trying to assist staff in funneling these properties to have that principled approach as to why we're looking at certain properties, so that staff can then focus on those properties that we've identified. Beyond that, and looking at the second part, when something's actually on the list, is what Dan had spoke about. Right now, when a property is on the registry, there are enumerated principles that are in the legislation as to why something should be on the registry. But when it comes to something beyond the list, that's lacking. And we're trying to be proactive in providing something to the committee and something to staff and ultimately the council on which to rely, so that they can make an informed and defensible position, or take a defensible position on a property to say why it's on the list as opposed to something else. So I hope that gives everyone a bit more background as to the approach we're taking. So Dan's presentation was very much focused on the fact that the legislation has changed recently, and we need to look at that and look at the ways that we can use that legislation. If it creates additional obligations on the part of the city, perhaps we can assist staff in addressing that, and as well in looking at the different mechanisms and different tools that are available in the new legislation to protect things that are on the list or registry.
Thank you, Al. Dan, please go ahead.
Yeah, so just to segue on what Al's saying, one of the slides I put up, actually the fourth slide, that comes from support documents that the government provide municipal committees, is the first item they talk about is identifying cultural heritage properties. That is the responsibility of the Heritage Committee. Personally, I feel Joanne and Issa have actually been carrying it, because for the time that I've been on the committees, the people that are bringing forward to this committee to consider in the listing has been Joanne. To me, she's doing all that work and identifying areas and where there's potential, and then bringing it to us. I think with a more disciplined approach, just segueing onto the points that Al made, because it will save them some resources and time. It'll also, I believe, in the last slide, protect the city, because you've had a more disciplined approach. We educate the HRH in doing this process. There is certainly a number of infrastructural type things like education of the subcommittee that we would need to go through, but we purposely have tried to make the checklist as a point that we could start from, and we can educate ourselves as we go along. We do wish to do some trial runs to make it practical. So I think it's very important that we really try and take some of the heavy lifting, you know, and do our particular area. So, you know, Karen, I can assure you that, you know, we don't need to step outside of the boundaries. What we're trying to do is actually supplement, I think. And when we do present you the process, you'll see a detail and step as to all the different roles of the individuals, and you'll see that it's quite an extensive sort of approach that probably, you know, to some extent can be say this is what we're following now, but it's being backed up with a lot more detail. So I think it's also important to recognize that the registry is a living inventory. Um, and with all inventories, there are things that get added and things that get, you know, taken away, and there are things that become shelf dated and they really need to be taken off the list. So we seem to be focused on the legacy of the inventory that was given to us at the time. I don't know, Joanne, maybe you can back me up on this, but I would say that there's been a very small percentage that's been added in more recent years, because everybody's focusing, when they think of heritage, they think of pre-1920 sort of buildings. But if you really look at what the definitions of heritage are, they talk about contributions to the community, they talk about uniqueness in design, they talk about, you know, local architects. There's all sorts of other elements other than simply a Georgian style home of the 1860s, for example. So I think there's a lot more. We're in an evolutionary stage here where they started off saying you could put everything on the list and really not worry about too much. I mean, if you had any inkling that it had heritage, we should put it on the list. We're now maturing ourselves to a point where we need to be a little bit more educated and a little bit more disciplined in how we evaluate these things, and bring in and supplement staff resources to utilize them in a more effective and efficient manner. And then in doing that, and because we can bring in you know, public opinion and trends and things like that into this, we can make recommendations to council that have much more they're based on you know, the facts on the ground and less on opinions as we go through. So you know, I hope you view it in that sort of way. It's something that at this particular stage, we purposely didn't want to get into detail, because this is exactly the kind of conversation I wanted to get going, to see whether we're on track, whether we need to go in a different direction, or does somebody else have some unique ideas that we should incorporate in what we're going through. So that's why I wanted to focus just on principles and go back to what are our responsibilities, what are our mandate, that sort of thing, and what does the government suggest that the mandates and the responsibilities of committees have. So I hope that helps clarify a little bit or muddy the water. I don't know. Hey.
Sorry, through you, Chair, you are on mute.
I'm sorry, and I did it too. So I was going to say that I will take one more comment, and then I have one question, and then we'll call the vote. Councillor West, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was actually going to say the same thing. I think the discussion's been good tonight. I again thank both Al and Dan and the others, I suppose, that have been working on this. I think this is an active discussion. I've been on this is my third different HRH committee, and I actually do appreciate the work that we're doing here today. I think that the recommendation, which I don't know whether it's been moved yet or not, but if it hasn't, I'll move it, to receive this information is fine. I appreciate that everybody that's on this committee is on this committee because they really want to help and preserve heritage. And that's, this discussion is having that conversation to move the ball in that direction. So I'm happy to move it. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, this is way more research than I've seen on this committee done by the committee itself in all 3 committees that I've been on. So I thank everybody for doing that. And I think we move from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will, I guess, ask my question with email of Dan. It's already been answered to a certain degree, but just on the last slide and with regards to the increased burdens on resources, including financial resources, I think from what I'm hearing, you were suggesting that this will not add increased burdens on staff resources or financial by going this direction. And I say that with regards to Joanne's comments and yours, that we will be presenting a more sort of informed comment or recommendation to council in the future based on this framework that we are receiving today. So I just wanted to clarify that. Maybe if you want to speak to that now, Dan, or we can continue that conversation. And I'm assuming that is the case.
No, from a volume point of view, we're not talking about a huge volume, but the principle is that it would come through us first for us to do this evaluation, and there would be a small percentage of that would go through to staff. So therefore, I expect there would be a reduction. There wouldn't be an extra burden on staff. It would be more focused on particular things. Okay. As this process becomes more public, when we finalize the process and it becomes more public, and as time goes on, as Marge was asking, who can nominate a property for heritage? The rules are anybody can do this. You can do this, I can do this, the committee can do this, the council can do this, anybody can do that. So in some future world, we could have lots of these nominations suddenly come in, and there needs to be a way to manage it. So this is an attempt to try to do that for future. But short term, I see helping and assisting rather than adding.
Thank you, Dan. I encourage the committee members to continue to ask questions via email and stay engaged. I think it's a very interesting direction that with the subcommittee's assistance we're going in. So thank you all. I believe the motion was moved by Dan. I am not muted. No. Sorry, Councillor Silvestre, did you have a comment? Or no? Okay. So all those in favor of item 5.2, receiving item A and B, are there any opposed? Seeing none, it is carried. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councillor, please go ahead.
Sorry, if I may, before we proceed to the end of the meeting, I just want to sort of cotton on to what Joanne was saying about Isa. Isa is going to be retiring, and this is her last Heritage Richmond Hill meeting with us. And I know I sent Isa a personal message today, but Isa, I want to thank you publicly for your incredible service to our city and to our residents. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You've taught me a lot, and I know you've taught our committees a lot. And it's been an absolute pleasure being able to get to know you and to be able to work with you. And I'm sure you're going to be greatly missed on Joanne's team. Yeah. So on behalf of Ward 5 residents and the residents of Richmond Hill, thank you so much. And I wish you all the very best for the future.
Oh, thank you so much.
There you go, Isa. I was so
Wow.
This is her actually. She didn't even have to be here. Her overtime it is her last day actually. So this is lovely to actually see her today and then to join us. Isa started as a heritage planner with us for 1 year. She was the one who actually completed the application for the DDO national designation, which we completed, and we now are designated. And then she moved on to become the senior urban designer. But the last few months, she's been really, really stepping in because Pamela's mat leave. She's just been tremendous in actually bringing all this heritage stuff together, and it's been a really great trooper. So again, great trip into retirement.
Well, happy retirement, Isa. It's been a pleasure having you. We've certainly benefited from your professionalism and from your demeanor. I certainly learned a lot from you. Sometimes, this kind of news comes so abruptly. You're kind of, shocked at the same time, happy at the same time, sad. So I wish you all the best. Happy retirement, and let's give a round of applause to Isa.
Isa, we have an opening on the subcommittee if you want to join and volunteer.
Thank you so much, everybody. I've really enjoyed working with you. You're an extremely knowledgeable and hardworking committee, and I think you're all going to be able to achieve a lot in your term. And I wish you all the best. I will miss you all. It's been a great experience. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
I'm going to say goodnight at this point. Thank you very much for letting me work with you. And our paths may cross. I am looking at doing a little bit of consulting, and I'm also starting a nonprofit group. And who knows, our paths may cross again. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you enjoy and get a lot of fulfillment out of working on the committee. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Isa. Wow,
We can find.
Yeah.
I can't find it out.
So moving on to our next item, the date of our next meeting is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Again, I want to thank all the esteemed councillors who joined us tonight, Councillor Silhouette, Councillor West, and Councillor Munch. Thank you to my Vice Chair, Marj Andre, all the dedicated volunteers of this committee. I believe this is the last meeting before we go to the summer break, so I hope everyone has a great summer, enjoy your time, and stay safe.
The OPP everywhere, can't speed. Red light, red light.
And hopefully we'll see you in the fall. So stay safe and have a great summer. Thank you, everyone. And I have a motion to adjourn the meeting tonight.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Councilor Silhouette is moved. All those in favor? Any opposed?
No.
All righty. Have a great summer, everyone.